Good afternoon, everyone. Our webinar will begin shortly. We're just waiting for folks to hop on here. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box, and we'll just give folks a couple more seconds to fill into the room here. Okay, let's get started. We only have an hour. So good afternoon again. Welcome to today's webinar, Prelude to Pride, Leadership, Inclusion, and Ways Forward. My name is Liz. I'm with NCBA CLUSA. And I'm just going to run through a few housekeeping items before we get started this afternoon. And so we're really excited to be joined by an incredibly diverse panel of experts this afternoon, just in time for Pride Month, to really consider the role cooperatives can play in fostering equity for everyone, particularly communities whose contributions to the cooperative movement have kind of been marginalized in the past. And so looking for ways to lift those voices up. I do want to let folks know that unfortunately Sam McCormick was unable to join us today, but we want to express our gratitude for their participation in shaping the content of our webinar this afternoon and the conversation that we're about to get to. So again, we have an hour together this afternoon. We'll keep 10 or 15 minutes toward the end for Q&A with the audience. So as you listen to today's panel discussion, please do add your questions to the chat box. Our team will be monitoring that conversation, and we will do our best to get to as many of those questions as possible. So to get us started this afternoon, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Angela Russell. She is our moderator for this afternoon, and she is Chief Diversity Officer at CUNA Mutual Group, and we are really thrilled to have her with us this afternoon guiding this discussion. Angela.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I am so delighted to be here and in community today. So the way that we're going to go ahead and start off is I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves, their name, their organization, and what they're looking forward to in this conversation. And after that, after we kind of introduce ourselves, the thing that I want to talk about first, before we get into Pride Month and inclusion from the cooperative standpoint, I want to do a check-in with our panelists to see what's top of mind and how they're doing. So many times when we are doing these conferences and a tragedy happens, we go on as business and as usual and don't take the opportunity to check in to see how each other is doing. So we'll do some intros and then I do want to do a check-in. So Cami, do you want to go first?
Hi, my name is Cami. I go by they, them. So I'm located in Oakland, territory of Huichin, part of the Ohlone Chochenyo Muekma land. I work for the Redwood Learning Collective, which is a tutoring, worker-owned, democratically run co-op that I helped found 2 years ago. And I also do some consulting, organizational development, operational development, consulting for co-ops, democratically run co-ops. Also in my last year of the Master's for Management and Cooperative and Credit Unions at St. Mary's. So getting ready for that capstone to be done. And what I'm looking forward to in this conversation, I have not had the opportunity to talk much about gender and transgender and sexuality inclusion at all in the co-op space yet. So yeah, it's nice to be part of this, and I really appreciate y'all making the space for this to happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Zach, do you want to go next?
I knew you would pick me next.
You're psychic. You're psychic.
Wonderful to be here. My name is Zach Christensen. I use he, him pronouns, and very excited to be here. I work in the credit union industry. I work for a strategic consulting company called Mitchell Stankovic and Associates. And we do a lot of work with boards and CEOs on a variety of different things. But I am also co-founder and executive director of SUE Pride, which is the National Association for LGBTQ+ credit union professionals. We are coming up on our 2nd birthday this June, and very excited to be here and be a part of this and see more of the LGBTQ+ inclusion in the greater cooperative universe. And I think that we can all do some amazing things together.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Happy to have you here. Gabrielle.
Hi, I'm Gabby. I use she, her pronouns exclusively. Today, I am located on the stolen lands of the Anishinaabe people. I work for National Cooperative Grocers as the Racial Equity and Food Justice Manager. I am happy to be in a space today where Black and queer voices will be prioritized. That's what I'm excited about, and that's what I'm looking forward to today. So, thanks for that, Angela.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. And I'm excited to just be sharing the space with you all. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So first, let's just do a check-in. How are you doing? We have had a lot of shootings over the past 14 days. Has it been 14 days? I can't keep track. How are you doing, and what are you bringing to the conversation? What's on your heart and mind? Who wants to go first? Go ahead, Gabby.
I'm feeling heavy overall. Um, I think I found out about the first race-based massacre that happened at Tops Friendly Market the day after it happened because I didn't have service on purpose. And so for me, it hit differently because now I'm in a grocery space. Before I wasn't. And so both spaces, prior to grocery, I was still Black. And so, now being in a space where Black people are being targeted on the busiest day just for being Black, in a Black neighborhood, the most segregated, neighborhood with 98% Black people, frequenting this store, it hit differently. And I didn't know what to do. The first thing I did was, call my friends to rant and hold each other. And the second call was to my therapist, because the third call was to figure out ways to support other Black folks in the food space. And so it's been a wave. I guess the best part has been being able to mourn and experience joy with other Black people impacted by this massacre over the last week or so. So for me, that's where I am right now. And I'm still, up and down. And then the most recent massacre, the school shooting, it's weird. Lots of feelings about that because I don't have kids, but I serve kids in practice, right? And so again, it's coming from several ways. Thanks for asking, Angela, for that check-in.
Yeah. Is it okay if I ask you a quick follow-up?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the words that I want to kind of circle that you said is joy. So you're experiencing that heaviness and joy. Can you talk about how joy is part of the resistance?
I mean, not only is joy a part of the resistance, it's part of the revolution, right? The goal is to not experience joy when all these things happen. But when you can be together and when you're allowed to mourn together, and a lot of times those are with people that look like you and experience joy, it's intentionally prioritizing exactly that rest and revolution. It's definitely a part of it. And I know it's a lot of guilt associated sometimes when you experience joy and grief. But honestly, when we grieve is about two things, right? Grief is about loss and change, right? And sometimes in loss and change, there is joy. So it's important to take that piece if we can, when we can, and not feel guilty about experiencing that.
Thank you. And then for this conversation, what would feel good for you? What can we do to help acknowledge and center your humanity during the conversation? The reason I'm asking that is so many times during these panel conversations, when we're brought together, we're seen as more than human or superheroes. So what can we collectively do in this virtual space to center your humanity through this conversation?
I would say for me to treat me like everybody else in this space, and also be prepared for me to say Black a bunch of times. I know we're here talking about, we're being queer right now, and that's great. But there has not been a space where I can separate the two, especially after, a tragedy like this. So be prepared for hearing Black a bunch of times.
All right. Thanks, Gabby. Zach or Cami, who wants to go next?
I'll go ahead and go.
Great. Thanks.
I think I've had the chance to do a similar check-in with Angela on another group that we are a part of after the top shooting. And I think I'm still feeling the same way. And, you know, unfortunately, it's anger. And it's very different. I've heard people say that they're angry at laws, they're angry at the person, they're angry at the situation. And for me, my anger really stems around that we once again repeatedly have these moments where it can push us to come together within that humanity that you were just speaking to, Angela. We have this moment to recognize that this is not a gender or a race. This is something that we are all facing as Americans. I just saw a list of all of the schools that have had shootings, and it just blew my mind. And we have this moment where we can come together around a commonality, but we're still not. And not saying that the people on this, I'm saying as a generalized term, this is a place where our politicians can come out and make statements that say this is wrong, and we still have politicians that don't. And that's where my anger stems, is that we have these moments where change could happen and maybe happen quicker, and we aren't able to do that.
Yes. So anger is definitely a part of grief as well. There's a huge connection there. What can we do to center your humanity during this conversation? I
believe it's right now being around those that are like-minded for me, recognizing that there are others who maybe are feeling the same way or feeling that they recognize that this is a moment that could be a moment of change for us as a nation, for us as a human race. And I feel that even though I don't see the other attendees on here, I feel that because they're here to be part of this conversation already. And so, I just, I want to throw out there to all of the parents. I have heard my best friend have a conversation with her child because we are at a conference and had to talk down her 12-year-old about going to school the next day, because he was so frightened, and recognizing and understanding, and mommy wasn't there. Mommy wasn't there to be a part of that. And unfortunately, that's our world. So to all the parents out there, to anybody who has kids who are connected to them, my love to you, and wishing everyone the best that they can have today.
Thanks, Zach. Cami, how are you doing?
I guess I've been pretty disconnected from things. That I've had to kind of take a step back from social media and news just the last few weeks to keep going. So I've been pretty checked out, which has a lot of privilege to it as well. But I guess ways that I cope around these things, I think Gabrielle said it really well, just finding ways to find joy. And for me, it's a lot of focusing on the things that I can impact and keep working on the interpersonal solidarity work that feels like it's small scale, but hopefully trickles up to change some of these things that just going to continue happening until that revolution.
Yes. And one of the things I want to highlight that you said is that being disconnected, and, and acknowledging that there's a privilege to that, but sometimes that's a component of self-care, of when do we turn off the social media so we can deal with what's going on here while still being connected with other folks. So thank you for that. What can we do to center your humanity during this conversation?
I really appreciate how you're holding this space already. So I don't know that I have any other suggestions, but yeah, appreciate how you're bringing attention to how people are showing up and what we need. And yeah.
All right, thanks. So I have a list of questions. I may or may not go through them because, why would I do that? But I want to start off with, we're getting ready to start Pride Month. Gosh, is it next week? Is June next week? Good God, that's too soon. But anyway, what does Pride Month mean for you this year, given everything that we've got going on across the country? What is salient for you this year, and what should our co-ops be paying attention to? Zach, let's go ahead and start with you with this one.
I have a pretty dedicated focus with CU Pride. So professionally, it's building out the conversation, continuing the conversation, the education, the networking in an industry where the conversation wasn't happening 2 years ago. We've seen great strides. This Pride for me is really taking it to the next level. We've had a lot of very, I don't want to say superficial, but moments of just bringing people in to a place where they're comfortable. And I think we're really starting to get to a place where maybe some of the executives, some of the boards might feel a little uncomfortable in the conversations that we're going to have. And I'm excited to push that forward. I'm very excited that we now have also grown this to a place where I no longer have to be the one that's in front of the camera. We've got a network of these voices and people who are ready to stand up, and I can push those voices out and no longer have to be that person. And I don't want to be. There are so many other great stories to be heard right now, and I'm glad to be able to facilitate that.
Awesome, thanks, Zach. Gabrielle.
I think for me, as far as my work goes, the thing I'm excited to see is how that's done in co-op land, right? I mentioned to Angela before we got on, I'm new to the land of co-ops. And so I'm looking forward to see what happens there. Previously, working when in healthcare, Pride Month was an afterthought. They barely can get pronouns right. In hospitals overall, like that's new to them. They're, receiving their kudos now. So I'm looking forward to that. The other thing I would like to see in my work is what folks are doing to retain queer employees around this time. And I think there's a lot of money and a lot of attention pushed towards recruitment versus retention. And the things I share with my coworkers is that retention is what makes recruitment happen. That's fine if you recruit them there, but how are you gonna keep them? So can we keep the people we got already? What does making a safer space look like? So those folks who are not out can be out, can feel a little bit safer to be out, to navigate. So I'm interested in learning this Pride Month as far as my work goes with co-ops.
So I have a follow-up question for you. And that is, so you've been here 4 months. What have your observations been around LGBTQ inclusion in the cooperative movement thus far? Good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah. So I would say, well, first of all, I was happy to see so many queer coworkers that I have. I was grandma. Yes, they're all here. When I got on, because I haven't worked in a space separate from community spaces, right, where there was enough people that felt safe enough to even use the pronouns that they were aligned with. So I was excited about that and talking to those folks, and they shared about feeling a sense of safety, with doing that. Like it wasn't necessarily a hard thing, and knowing that, if there is any exploration with that, they can change it again. Like these are things they said. So I was happy to see that. But I've only been at NCG, so my opinion is coming, from a food co-op space versus not. I heard about this from Sam, at a conference, at the Up and Coming Food Co-op conference. So, and there was a lot of queers there. And I was like, yes, they're all here. Like I jumped in right, right when I should have. So I'm excited overall. So far, just good things, but I know there's more for me to learn.
Is there a sense of faux wokeness among progressive cooperatives around LGBT inclusion? I don't, sorry, y'all, I tend to be extra all the time. Like I should have said that up front. I mean, have you sensed that? And if so, how does it show up? Oh, Gabby, you muted yourself.
Yes, I think there is a sense of faux wokeness. And I think it's related to race. I think they want to feel like they've done well with how we treat this community. because it's been so poorly about how we look at race, right? And so when I say I see a lot of folks that seem to feel a little bit safer with using the pronouns they align with, is everybody okay with that? Because they have this, Black and brown folks that are disgruntled about, either being a member of a co-op or being an employee, of a co-op. So that's what I'm seeing. Like I'm looking at that. Like, why is this group feeling so safe and, not the other group? So yes, I would say full wokeness for sure. A lot of people looking for kudos
And cookies.
for absolute
Kudos and
bare
cookies.
minimum. Kudos and cookies.
Yes.
Yeah, I always say we don't applaud fish for swimming, and this is one of those spaces. I see a lot of that.
I love that. We don't applaud fish for swimming. I love that. Cami, you briefly unmuted yourself. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I think it depends on what spaces I've been in. I think the smaller, more grassroots spaces have been a lot more, I felt a lot more supported, I guess, in terms of my pronouns, for example. I think the bigger, more institutionalized spaces, there's been a sense of, I respect and accept queer and trans people, which is better than the alternative, and not a ton of, but I think this is around diversity and inclusion in general across probably all identities. There's just not much recognition of how much support and conversations need to happen in order to really make that a reality. So yeah, supporting people who struggle with pronouns, like coaching them outside of meetings to one-on-one practice pronouns. That's like a small thing that people could do that would go a long way to not continuously get misgendered in spaces. But I think that's just a general recognition of, or a failure to recognize how people are really systemic creatures and how a lot of what shapes our behavior really depends on how we structure spaces and how we, just like the supports and structures we create.
Thank you. I love that so much in terms of the systemic nature. And what I like that you were talking about specifically, Cami, is specific things that folks can do. I think sometimes when we're in these spaces, whether it's LGBTQ plus or POC or diversity and inclusion in general, folks feel overwhelmed and don't know where to start. So I want to ask a very specific question around the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index, and how can organizations use that as a starting point? And I want to emphasize starting point around making sure that their organizations are inclusive around LGBTQ plus policies and practices. Who wants to start with that one? Zach, you did an eyebrow thing, so I'm like, Zach, do you want to start?
And I think that was my tick, Angela. So no, I think actually this is a conversation that we have been having within CU Pride is figuring out a way for us to measure the level of inclusiveness of credit unions for the LGBTQ plus folks. I think that HRC has a really great foundation. One of the things as we've looked into it is that credit unions cannot apply for it because of the type of business model that they are, yes. And so, but I think that they list out, they give you the checklist, right, of the things that they look at. And I think that anybody can take that and utilize that. And I think it needs to be at a strategic level, C-suite level, where they're really taking a look at it and then bringing in the other voices to make sure that, yes, we are. Don't just say we are. Let us also have a moment and a voice in this. But I think that they have done a really great job to start that process. And so it's something that we're talking about in credit unions to be able to do more broadly in having a place where someone can be, I hate to throw out a certification, you are LGBTQ plus inclusive, but it's a great place to start to know that at least the organizations are going that way. In the question of the wokeness, I think with credit unions, we're not woke enough. So I think that's our problem right now. And so I am never assuming when we have credit unions who maybe for the first time are throwing up a Pride logo during Pride Month, as this may be the actual first month that they're actually recognizing it. And so I'm really digging in to make sure that's great, and we're going to help them continue on that journey and continue to build that into the next year and beyond.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Cami, you had unmuted yourself for the HRC as well. And Rebecca, in the chat, you asked if this is the index that I'm referring to, and it is. Thank you for putting that in the chat. Go ahead, Cami.
I mean, I think in general, it's pretty helpful. There's a lot of different elements that it does cover. I thought in terms of what maybe is missing, I think often like poly relationships or relationships that are more expansive, like you could have a domestic partner that's, you know, I don't know, just investigating what we mean when we extend benefits to different partners, beyond what just the legal definition is, or just beyond like strict equality, and actually towards like, what's actually meaningful to the people that we have in our communities. And I know Aorta has been doing a lot of work around rethinking their benefits beyond just the strict legal definitions, which we can turn to. And then, yeah, I think I said this before already, but I don't think it includes, I think it includes a lot of educational components, but not a ton of like coaching or like what's the restorative justice pathway, what's the accountability process, how do we facilitate like interpersonal change, and how do we hold people accountable when they, you know, don't, and keep our people safe when people can't or just won't change.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Cami. Gabby, do you have some thoughts on this one too? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in alignment with Zach and Cami. The only thing I would add is I think it would be a good thing to use if it's one of the many things you're using, right? Because, you know, in this process, anytime somebody has to fill out something, that if they are going to fill out completely truthful, that means someone or somewhere has made them feel safe enough to do so. And most organizations fail at that unless it's an organization of one. There's no way we can make any space, even this space is not a safe space, it's a safer space, because we can only govern ourselves. And so we can't provide that, you know, 100% security for anybody to be completely honest, but, you know, by building relationships and, you know, doing some of the things that's been said we're going to do and not be performative, that is how we encourage, you know, honesty about our identities, because that's really what we're putting on the line. In addition to that, it's a lot of emotional labor to spend writing out your identities and how you're impacted for having those, which isn't the same experience as cishet white men. You know? So yeah, if it's a part of it, if it's just one piece of the path, that's great. These are things I would say about Robin DiAngelo and white fragility. If it's just one small piece, great, but it has to be one small part of a lot of other things you do. It can't be the only thing. Bare minimum.
Yep. I am texting my son right now because my mom is here to pick him up and he is not paying attention to the door, so I'm multitasking. Hold on just a second.
We can decolonize the panel.
What was that?
We can decolonize the panel. You can do what you need to do.
Oh my God. Of course this is going to happen while I'm moderating a panel. So next question for you is, oh yes, community of care in action. Thank you so much for that. So next question for you all is, how have you seen organizations get it wrong, and what are the lessons for the group of audience folks that are listening here today? And while you talk about this, I'm going to go get my son. I'll be right back. I am so sorry.
Organizations doing it wrong. I'll speak from like a healthcare standpoint. One of the hospitals that I worked for, man, they did a lot of stuff wrong. But one of the hospitals that I worked for, they had historically not ever raised any flags during Pride Month or said anything about Pride Month. And the first time they did, they mentioned it. And then right afterwards, you know, of course, after the 3 sentences that they had, you know, about it, they had another sentence saying, but we recognize all identities. I'm like, wait a minute. Is this the first time you've ever mentioned it? So a lot of folks harassed them online and they never responded. They never responded to it. And, you know, just like we forget about other things that happen in the world, people forgot about it and moved on. But queer folks impacted by that. But me and my employees, we remembered it and impacted us. Did that have a impact on retention? Yes. Yeah, so that's just one of the ways I can think of.
Gabby, I'm going to come back to you after Cami and Zach go, because one of the things that I'm circling in my head as a theme, in addition to we don't clap for fish swimming, because that is just brilliant, but is this notion around retention, how we focus so much on recruitment and retention. So I want to get back to that. But Cami and Zach, where do you all go ahead, Cami? Where have organizations gotten it wrong, and what are the lessons learned?
Well, I had an experience at a tutoring company prior to us, my colleagues and I, starting our own co-op, where the founders didn't want to put my pronouns on the website. And I think just not, yeah, I mean, they did eventually, but it was just a lot of labor for me to have that conversation and explain why. And I think just in general, not taking the leadership of the trans folks that were there about, how we wanted to portray ourselves. I think they were concerned that it would harm our business or my ability to get students. But if anything, I've had more students wanted to work with me since they had some, because parents want mentorship for their kids who are queer and who are trans. And so, especially in the Bay Area, it's just like a different landscape here. But yeah, I think that was a really rough one that made me, that was fun.
That sucks. I'm sorry, that just sucks. I also want to, Zach, after you go, in addition to talking about retention, I also want to talk about emotional labor, because there's a theme that's coming up around emotional labor. But go ahead, Zach.
I think we've had some pretty nationally recognized instances of organizations doing it wrong that have been pretty in the forefront. Netflix, Disney, where it was either stalled or not fast enough. So I those are very easy ones to call out for me, without knowing some of the other ones, especially within our industry. I think lessons learned from that is that there's some grace in those missteps that I think that organizations can't come back from. And I think also being in the community, find those moments of grace where, okay, what is your next step? Where are you going with this? How are you correcting, and what are you going to do to ensure that the future of your organization and the future of your employees is going to stay on track with where you want to go with that? So just a few things to add.
Thanks, Zach. And I want to highlight and amplify some of the things that are going on in the chat. Satya said that we're not asked about our individual experiences as queer and trans people at the company because they can't send out surveys just to our communities, right? That is a whole nother topic. And so there are a lot of assumptions that happen. Another part around at Case Western University, the graduation ceremony, not using names, preferred names of trans folks who are graduating. And the question is, how do we fix bureaucracy and layers of academia? That is a whole nother thing. Yes. And then, wow, there's a lot. Thank you all for all the sharing. I want to go back to the emotional labor piece, because I think that's a big deal as we go into Pride Month and beyond. So often, historically marginalized folks are asked to do the work of the dominant culture within organizations, right? And that comes at a cost of overall emotional and mental well-being. What is the line that each of you has to balance in terms of doing the work that you do at your particular organizations and saying, I'm not here to do your work for you? Gabby, do you want to go ahead and start that off?
Yeah, I say no. Like, I chose the organization I work for based on me feeling safe enough to say that to my boss. Like, yeah, I don't got it. I also think, separate from my organization, and maybe they do this, but I think other organizations have an opportunity to compensate the folks that they're asking to do that if they want to, financially, even if they work there, because that's emotional labor and that's not something you can get back. How are you going to debrief yourself after you give up, your emotional labor, because you still got a job to do. Living as a person with any minoritized identity, especially multiple minoritized identities, is tired. You wake up tired. It's a baseline of discomfort that you wake up in every day. And when you're asked to do extra things at work is one thing, but not feeling safe enough to say no to those things is another thing. All of that impacts emotional labor.
So one of the things that I've noticed, and this is just a follow-up question, if that's all right. One of the things that I've noticed is that dominant culture folks say, okay, we don't want you to do the emotional labor, so we're gonna read this book and do it ourselves. You just had a full-on reaction, Gabby.
It's tiring. It's tiring, right? You can't. Yes, but I do think, white people need to gather white people. Hetero folks need to gather hetero folks. They do have to do some of that work. But if you have somebody that is willing and able, compensate them to do it. Mm-hmm. You should do it. That's it. Again, that's bare minimum. You don't get kudos for that either. Most organizations have the money. They just tight. Don't want to give it up. But you can do it. That's how you can put into the community. A lot of queer and trans people put money back into the community. I would say, about a fourth of my salary goes back into community somehow. They intentionally do those things and that's considered a norm. So when you pay those people to give up their emotional labor, to put their identities on the line, because there's, a risk of safety there too, because you don't know who's listening, right? That is one way you can intentionally, feed that community.
Thank you. Cami, what are your thoughts on emotional labor and balancing and centering your humanity as you are giving so much of yourself?
It's a tough one because my job is 100% emotional labor since I work with kids one-on-one and families. So I feel like that's just kind of embedded in the work that I do. But I guess I can think of just, leaning on just solidarity. So I think I've been actually thinking about this as new people have been joining the co-op, and we're not all on the same page about, what gender and sexuality really means and how to support each other around that. So I've been asking I've been thinking about asking one of my colleagues to maybe run a training or take some people aside and talk to them and help them just see the areas that they might need to start thinking about. And I think in general, I think Gabrielle, you kind of mentioned this, but caucusing, just organizing in groups. And I just took a class on DEI at the St. Mary's, and we got to interview some orgs about their practices. And Aorta does caucusing where they'll have, mostly around race, but if there's an issue happening in the co-op, maybe the Black caucus will tell the White caucus, hey, you guys need to do X, Y, Z. And then they have an external facilitator. Just having the ability to give feedback without having to then follow up and do the emotional labor, and having also paid opportunities for the marginalized groups to gather and to do some healing and community building. I think one of the things we did at the previous tutoring companies, we got to have coffee every month with the other queer and trans folks and just kind of vent about what was happening. So I think that's, beyond paying people for their emotional labor, also compensating them for just having to process the stuff that they have to deal with in the organization is important too.
Awesome. Thanks, Cami. Zach, your thoughts on emotional labor? Because you are literally at the forefront in the credit union movement for this.
But I also love you, Angela. I get put in these situations where I love these moments where I get reminded of my privileges sometimes, and because I am a cis white male, and one of the things that I have found and had to be very intentional is that I'm very excited. I'm very excited about what CU Pride is and what it can do for credit unions and beyond, which also gets me excited about knowing and pinpointing people within our industry who are of different experiences, and just wanting to go, hey, I would love you to speak on. And I've had to be very intentional about what those conversations look like. And it's been, this is what I want our industry to hear and see and feel. Do you feel comfortable in doing that? And in what ways can I facilitate that? I don't have a cookie cutter. We can do this in an interview. We can do this in a blog, a pre-recorded video. In what way will that help you? And I mentioned that, we're able to bring some other voices, and I'm very, very lucky that so many have just raised their hands and said, put me in front and let me do this. And hearing from Cami and Gabby now, understanding that there's more to it than just them raising their hand and saying that, is going to make me a lot more aware of the asks or the things that I'm looking for from our community to help us push forward. So thank you, Gabby and Cami, for teaching me something today.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Zach.
I will add to that too, Zach. I think one of the is Zach or Zachary? Did you say okay? Okay, I'm just like, oh, I hate doing that. Okay, the other thing I would add to that, I think a lot of times it's cis white men, right, are often asked like, hey, can you speak to this? And one of those, the answer could be like, I know somebody else that could do it, and pass it on to a person with those, minoritized identities, to give them the opportunity not only to receive the spotlight, but to also make a coin, because those opportunities don't always, go that way, specifically for queer and trans people, specifically for trans people, especially during Pride Month, are often left out the conversation, and is usually discriminated against more than any other person or people within the LGBTQIA plus community.
Thanks, Cami. Gabrielle. Cami, did you have anything to offer? Anything else to add? Anything that's top of mind? All right. So let's go to this retention. So a lot of organizations are on this DEI kick. I shouldn't call it a DEI kick. This is literally my job. But a lot of organizations are doing this DEI thing. And some of the focus tends to circle around recruitment. And Gabby, I loved what you talked about in terms of retention, right? So, recruitment doesn't mean anything if you're not creating an environment where people want to stay and you can retain solid talent. What should organizations be thinking about as relates to retention?
I would say the employees they already have first.
Say that again and tell me why.
The employees they already have first, because for me, if I'm feel good about my job, I'm telling all my friends to come.
Mm-hmm.
And you better believe most of those friends are Black, brown, queer, and trans. Those are the people I'm like, hey, come work here. So that's the first thing. And then like we are sitting paying for recruiters, and a lot of jobs, recruiters get 30% of whatever that person is hiring for. What if we put that back into, having a welcoming committee, for the staff, or, taking them out, for a night on time, whatever the case may be, money into, fuel money into retention and take it out of recruitment, because you can get me to come, but what's going to get me to stay? We aren't staying at jobs. So, I would say we're not staying at jobs for loyalty anymore. Right. People stay at jobs for 3 to 5 years right now. There's no pension.
So what's going to keep you what's going to keep you at the National Grocers Co-op? What will help retain you in this movement?
Work-life balance.
Yeah.
Work-life balance. And it's different because now I'll be 40. So, when I was in my 20s, I'm like, the ability to work 80 hours and get extra money. That would have been my answer. Like, I would stay there. Right. For that, my body doesn't work like that anymore. But so for me, it's work-life balance and being listened to. You don't have to take my ideas, but at least listen to them. Mm-hmm. At least listen to them. Like, really be inclusive. Right. Mm-hmm. I want to feel liberated. I've said a lot of things at National Co-op of Grocers that I'm sure was uncomfortable, and there'll be more uncomfortable things coming. But right now, I feel safe to say those things without worried about losing my job. So not feeling worried to make white people uncomfortable, because that's who's going to be uncomfortable. Not worried making, cishet folks uncomfortable. They can feel it for a little bit. That's a lot of folks' baseline when waking up. So I think that's what's going to keep me here ultimately. Money is secondary. Do I like money? Absolutely. Would I like more of it? Yes. But that is still third on my list of reasons why I would stay.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabby. Zach, what about you? What are your thoughts on retention?
Oh, the question of the decade, right? I love Gabby's, and I love her reasoning too, which is, you might have an assumption of what it might be, and I think that's great. I think we can't make any progress if the top down just doesn't get it. And the only way the top down is going to get it is to have the voices there. And when I say top down, it's boards. And I saw someone in the comments make that discussion. And we have some very great organizations, some very great credit unions who have intentionally put themselves into LGBTQ spaces to seek out those that will fit not only the core and the values of the credit union, but also bring that voice in. And that has filtered down into what they do and the openness. So you can recruit in LGBTQ spaces, but you get people in and they don't feel the comfort, they don't feel the sincerity. Once again, we're going back to performative or said inclusion rather than expressed or done inclusion. But that's kind of my thought process. I'm very focused on top down to have the voices there to be able to share that voice.
Thank you, Zach. Cami, your thoughts on retention?
I have a lot to say about this. I feel like my thoughts kind of split into two categories. So I work for a democratically run, or we don't have a boss. Every 6 months there's a new proposal for how to restructure how we do everything. So it's very fluid and flexible. So I would say, and I also feel like there's no real true inclusion and within oppressive systems, without kind of uprooting the system. And most co-ops, unfortunately, are pretty top-down run. Despite the democratic nature, it is kind of, I don't know. I don't think voting goes a long way in terms of really giving people agency. But so that said, what can top-down run co-ops do? Well, I think I think maybe the biggest thing that isn't done is creating a culture of growth and like a growth mindset, a culture of learning, a culture of, I think if you, no matter any amount of training that you can do is not going to really go anywhere if the people are not there to receive and open to changing how they interact with others. And then the corollary to that is recognizing when people are continuously causing harm to those with minoritized identities and asking them to leave. I think that they actually cost companies a lot of money, and they are generally the reason why people leave, more so than anything else. So yeah, if people can't align themselves with that culture of growth, then having a very clear pathway to have them leave so that you can have more people come in and not have to deal with that ongoing like re-traumatization.
Thank you. I love that. And the courage to ask people to leave takes a lot of courage, and sometimes it's necessary. Not even sometimes, a lot of times it's necessary, but it doesn't always happen. So we are getting some questions through the Q&A, and I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the questions that are in the Q&A. And folks, please keep submitting them. Oh, Cami, were you going to say something?
Sorry, I just want to say one last thing. I think also there's another thing that happens a lot, especially in organizing spaces, is just this idea of, I don't know, disposability culture or canceling people out because they make mistakes. And so I think that there's a really tough balance between holding people accountable and not letting things slide and, asking people to leave when they cause repeated harm, and also being intentional about what we call harm, because I think sometimes that can be co-opted into, a lot of people have a lot of trauma. And I remember, I think it's easy to, sometimes people have a hard time distinguishing between, what is an experience of like relived trauma versus what is someone actually traumatizing me. But it's all really complicated. And I think it can easily go into, I think it actually hurts our movements when we don't work together to heal together, but it also hurts our movements when we, don't protect those who are most impacted by ongoing harm. So yeah.
That's awesome. I love what you're saying. It reminds me a little bit Actually, it reminds me a little bit of transformative justice and restorative justice type of work. Those are separate but connected. And then it also like is reminding me of Adrienne Marie Brown's book, We Will Not Cancel Us. So thank you for bringing that into the space. And I feel like, I know that I'm a work in progress on that front, because people have called me Petty LaBelle because I'm so petty. So instead of Patty LaBelle, I am Petty LaBelle. And I need to work on myself in that space. So thank you so much for bringing that into the conversation. So there are a couple of questions in the Q&A that I want to go over. And this one is directly to Gabby. Gabby, you good with getting a question?
I am. Hopefully I can answer it.
Cool. How can workplaces make more transformational spaces and efforts for retention for queer and trans BIPOC employees? The caveat, we need to actually recruit to even have retention of queer and trans BIPOC folks because we've got so few. But what are your thoughts around transformational spaces and retention?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is figure out why that is. Like, why don't you have any Black and brown people, Black, brown, Indigenous people, or queer people? And then if you figure it out, say it out loud. Right. What I've learned in my 4 months of co-op land is that the one thing that that co-ops are really good with retaining our board members. For some reason, those are the same people seemingly over and over again for lots of terms. Reminds me of something else, in
Say
politics.
what it reminds you of.
It reminds me of politics, how people have these terms that last forever. Sometimes we might need to get some folks, some different aged folks, different type of folks in the board to help make those changes. But then, once you figure out why you don't have those people, is say it out loud why, and not just amongst the board. Put that on the job description. I applied for my job based on it. It didn't say that, but it was a non-traditional job description. That's the only reason I applied to work for NCG. So it wasn't that basic one that somebody copy and pasted and put all these things there. It was very intentional. So be intentional in those, and in the job description as well. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question for everyone. Any suggestions on how to tactfully challenge our white male cis older board execs to move beyond performative DEI, i.e. marketing, to taking part within queer spaces, like sponsoring, attending, participating in local pride events, organizations, and with visible branding rather than just emailing or participating quietly? So how do you get folks in dominant culture, mostly white, male, cis, older, to go beyond performance? Go ahead, Zach.
I would say where I have seen the most success is outside voice. Bring somebody else in that's not within the organization to showcase what they're doing. Even better, if you can, find a peer. So in credit unions, find another credit union, preferably same state, same area, with board members that are doing those things, to come in and cross-share and speak to the reasons why. I find that, we are consultants, and I find that our voice tends to hit different than when the CEO pops into the board meetings and says, we need to do this. So I say bring in outside voices to discuss and share and talk about those things.
Thanks, Zach. Cami or Gabby?
I was just saying, bring in outside voices and pay them. Pay them. Make sure you show that value in that way too. So.
Yes. Thank you.
The question was, how do you get
beyond performative DEI for LGBTQ Pride Month for white men, cis, dominant culture folks?
Ooh, yeah, I think well, you can't make anyone change who doesn't want to change, make anyone learn who doesn't want to learn. But I think that showing people how they can benefit, people with privilege, how they can benefit from unlearning their own oppressive identities. I just think that there's a lot of benefit personally, even if you're not thinking about the duty that we have as people with privileged identities to dismantle oppressive systems. But maybe sometimes that can speak to people who are kind of not ready to think about their role or their responsibility to dismantle systems.
Thank you. One last question, and then I'll do a kind of a checkout with each one of you. How can we demonstrate potential to LGBTQ job candidates that we're a safe space without outing our current LGBTQ employees publicly?
Well, the first thing I would say is just understand that there aren't any safe spaces, and there's no way for them to know that, prior to coming there, even if you have a flag on your website. I would poll, not just the queer employees, but I would ask folks about what do the folks that already work there, like, do they feel safe? There may be some, you asked about outing queer employees. There are probably other queer employees that are not out because they don't feel safe. Like that's usually the thing. There's always queers everywhere, just to be clear. Like, we're everything, we're everywhere, but something has to happen for you to know that. You have to do something to demonstrate safety. So I would say work you do in the community, like truly being in the community physically. Yes, donations are good, but truly show up. When somebody's looking for donations for a mutual aid, donate to a mutual aid, not just a 501c3. So just finding ways to like truly be in community with those folks besides throwing a flag up during Pride Month.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't think you have to out LGBT employees at all or talk about them at all in order to show that obviously if you have a majority LGBTQ company, yeah, you're more likely to have a more inclusive space, but I think it's all about what practices the company has and not at all about how many or who is queer or trans in the company.
I love that. Go ahead, Zach.
I love that. I love both. Gabby, perfect. Nail on the head, as they say. I also want people to recognize that until we globally as a culture can come to a place of synergy, you will never have a work environment where every single queer person is out, period. And it's not because of you or your organization, FYI. There are other reasons within the queer community that we don't come out in different spaces. So don't look to, all 100% of our queer folks are out at it won't happen, and don't try to use that as a metric. Just continue to try building the places that Gabby and Cami have really shared.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. So we've got 2 minutes left as part of this conversation. In these last 2 minutes, what's bubbling up for each of you that you want to leave our audience with?
I'm going to go first because mine's going to be quick. I have learned 1,000 things during this webinar, this call. And so for me, I hope that it's encouraged everyone else to continue doing their own journey of education, and we can be part of the community and we still have things to learn. And so I am, been graced with Gabby and Cami today for the things that they've shared with me and that I can continue to utilize and share out in my own sphere. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Cami or Gabby?
Yeah, I think just basic inclusion to me is always wherever you are going to put people's name, you should put what anybody needs to know in order to talk to that person respectfully. So that's name pronunciation, pronouns, and off the top of my head, I can't think of any more, but anything you need to know to talk about a person, if you're putting their name, you should know all the other things you need to know in order to talk about that person. And then the other thing is so many materials have gendered language like she, her, or she, him. And that is just especially when I was first coming out as trans, I think that was such an easy way for me to dissociate in company meetings. So just really paying attention to what is that language in the materials, company materials that you have. Take out the pronouns completely. There's ways to do that if you can't get on board with singular they, them, which has been around forever. But if you can't get on board with that, you can take out the pronouns completely. But yeah, but those are like real basic things that should be done.
Thank you, Cami. Gabby?
Yeah, I want to encourage people to do the things that Cammie said, because that's absolutely the bare minimum that you can do. Other things, I'm happy that this happened in May versus June, and this should serve as a reminder for everybody else to get ready for next year. Because if you're starting to get ready now for Pride Month, a little late. So just try to do stuff leading up to Pride Month. It doesn't always have to be in June. Queer people are queer year round. They need the same type of support year round. So get started.
Thank you. Zach, Cammie, and Gabby, thank you for being on this panel, and for everyone who joined this conversation. Send some love to the chat to our panelists. Thank you all. Cammie, you unmuted yourself. What are you going to say?
I was just going to say thank you all. And Gabby and Zach, yeah, this was a really engaging and nice conversation. So yeah, appreciate for you both for what you brought to.
Yes.
Same. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.